Welcome in, everybody, to another installment of Fielding the 68, brought to you by Rhythm. I'm Faxon Childress, alongside Kevin Sweeney and Andy Bottoms. We've got a lot to discuss about the last week in college basketball, a lot of bubble talk, some one seeds shifting around, and then going to cap it off with a preview of this weekend slate. First things first, Kevin, Andy, fellas, how we feeling? Conference tournament season is starting to be upon us on the low major and mid-major levels. This is an exciting time.
I'm just excited to see Sweeney move from the host chair to the bracketologist chair. I mean, what more could you ask for on a Friday?
I guess I must have learned something from these guys this year, so I get to pinch hit with the big dogs.
Yeah, excited to have Kevin pinch hitting, and let's throw things into reaction from the past week. Andy, I'll start with you. This past week, who helped themselves the most?
I mean, I got to get the obligatory Seton Hall mention in here, although this was on my radar anyway, despite the threats from Dagan prior to the show. But Seton Hall in a big bubble game against Villanova, for me that helped move Seton Hall out of the Dayton area, although not by much, but at least help them get another win over a tournament caliber team, and so move them there. I think the other, couple other ones, Colorado winning at Oregon. Not sure whether that will get them in the bracket in our field. I know some have put them in the field. I'm a little maybe more skeptical, I guess I would say. But winning at Oregon at least was a game that allowed them to not get bumped out of it. And we'll probably put the Texas A&M win over Mississippi State in the same boat. It was kind of a win to stay alive, which is pretty important for bubble teams at this point to be able to do it and not play their way out of it. So I think those are a few on the winners side that stood out to me at least, and particularly this time of year. For me, it's more around the bubble, even though there were some big wins by teams at the top of the bracket as well.
Sweeney, what about you? Anybody that stuck out this past week that could have potentially boosted their stock that Andy didn't mention?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bubble stuff Andy hit well. I would say one team I would flag is Tennessee winning on the road. We'll talk about the one seeds in a bit. I just thought Tennessee finding a way to win that game at South Carolina, complete this, hellacious stretch where they beat Auburn, Alabama, and now they get, I guess, Kentucky this weekend to round it out. I mean, what more of an audition could you get for why you deserve that one seed? And I think they've just done a phenomenal job down the stretch. That win was huge. I think gives them a little bit more breathing room for that number one spot. I think a chance they could fall off with a Kentucky loss and then a loss in the SEC tournament. But I think Tennessee in good position now for the first number one seed in program history.
And Sweeney, we'll stick with you for this. On the other side of the equation, in the past week, who hurt themselves the most? I know Wake Forest probably sticks out amongst the most obvious ones, and ACC in legitimate jeopardy of only getting 3 bids now.
Yeah, I think the can't lose games are the ones I would focus on. So Wake is a great example of that. Wake was a group that, I think the metrics always loved, but didn't have those quality wins. And so to slip up at home against the Georgia Tech team that has been dangerous, but it was a bad loss by the metrics, measure. It is really bad, and it makes it really difficult to envision Wake being an at-large team. Maybe if they go on a big run here in the conference tournament, they could get back into the conversation. But I think it's going to be really hard for Steve Forbes' club. And I think the same would be said for Utah losing at Oregon State. Again, has Oregon State been a little feisty? Yes. Did they beat Arizona? Yes. But you cannot lose to Oregon State and expect to be an NCAA tournament team. Utah is really struggled in Pac-12 play, now under 500 at 9-10. Only one road win in Pac-12 play. They've been playing from an advantaged hand, if you will, because they did such a good job in the non-conference. They beat Wake Forest on a neutral court. That's a nice win from a metric standpoint. St. Mary's on the road is a phenomenal win. Beat BYU, who's obviously played tremendous basketball lately. But unfortunately, you just cannot be a 500 team in this Pac-12 and have some of the bad losses that they've taken, whether it's Arizona State, whether it's Oregon State, and hope to be an NCAA tournament team. So Utah definitely needs to now beat Oregon this weekend and maybe need to do more work in the Pac-12 tournament to get back into the serious conversation, in my opinion.
In full agreement with you there, Kevin. Andy, anything to add on about teams that potentially had their stock dip this past week in college basketball?
I'll throw a couple out that are maybe a little bit more under the radar. Mississippi State, we've had in the 8-9 range for a while, but at this point they're 2-8 on the road. So losing that game I mentioned a minute ago really helped Texas A&M. Another kind of weird knock on Mississippi State, who's got some good wins, beat Tennessee and Auburn. Even the Washington State win has aged well. but they're just 2-8 in true road games. They've somehow managed to go 6-0 in neutral site games, so that helps even that out just a little bit. But they're one that the losses are starting to pile up for them at some point, and so at 19-11, probably not in danger of missing the field by any stretch. But they've also got South Carolina coming in over the weekend, which becomes a big game. And the other one is San Diego State. They were 14th in the committee reveal. They've only played 4 games since then. I think that's a little bit of an oddity because they just played the Friday before. But they're just 2-2 in those games and basically completed their road slate against the other top teams in the Mountain West at 0-6. So they lost at all of the other teams that are in the field plus UNLV in those games. And so it isn't that they haven't won games away from home, but those were some missed opportunities for them to really solidify potentially a protected seed, which is now, at least for now, out the window. Could potentially work their way back depending upon what they do in the Mountain West tournament. But they're a team that has hurt themselves a little bit by not being able to win, albeit tougher road games on their schedule of late, but they've struggled in that regard.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement about the intriguing case of San Diego State. And in segment 2, going to go over that 4, 5, 6 seeds and talk a little bit about what could potentially be shifting up in that range. Shifting gears now towards the 1 seed reveal, the weekly 1 seed reveal on Fielding the 68. Going to see what the consensus 1 seeds are right now and get some live reactions. So Purdue, UConn, and Houston, aka the locks, if you will, the top 3 overall seeds in that order. And then a new number 1 seed sneaking into the fray with Tennessee at that number 4 overall spot. Kevin, I'll throw it to you first. Instant reactions on these 1 seeds.
Yeah, look, no huge surprises. I think Tennessee belongs on the 1 line just because of the body of work, and part of that is out of Arizona's control, right? It's not like they've had bad losses lately. They're out of the field or out of the 1 line, today because they haven't had the opportunities in Pac-12 play that Tennessee had. I mean, look at Tennessee's resume here. Just in the last week, they've beaten Auburn at home, Alabama on the road, at South Carolina. They already had the win over Alabama at home. They've beaten Florida. That's a good team. They've beaten Purdue. They've beaten Wisconsin. There's not Purdue, Illinois. They've beaten Wisconsin. They have no bad losses. Like their resume is very complete, in my opinion. And so it's a pretty easy sell for me to have them on that number 1 line. I will say this, are we sure Tennessee even wants that 1 seed? Obviously, it's a big deal emotionally, but I think it's a good example, from a bracketing standpoint, where it may actually behoove them to wind up as a 2, because if they're the 1 seed and Arizona's the top number 2 and they both get sent out west, you're potentially playing Arizona for a spot in the Final Four in Los Angeles. Whereas if you're Tennessee and you're a 2 seed, maybe you're sent to Dallas to play Houston, and a Houston team that's banged up, right? I think in some ways you look at it and you're like, yeah, maybe Tennessee would be better served as a 2. But at the same time, it's hard to argue with the first number 1 seed in program history, and I think Tennessee is on the cusp of achieving that.
Andy, throwing things to you on the other side of the coin, is there a case that can be made for Arizona to be that final number 1 seed at this juncture before we go into conference tournament play?
Yeah, I think at this point that's a tough argument to make, given how well Tennessee's played of late and the quality wins they've picked up. What's interesting is there are only 3 teams that have been undefeated since the reveal, and most of them sit around in this general area. One of them is North Carolina, one of them is Tennessee, and the other is Houston, who's really used that to tighten their grip on that 1 seed. I just think the overall quality wins and the wins away from home in true road games, winning at Alabama, at Wisconsin, at Kentucky, and even at South Carolina, which from a net perspective isn't as high because of the way the predictive metrics are treating the Gamecocks. And don't take that away from Arizona. They won at Duke, which is obviously a very tough place to play, have a couple of solid neutral court wins. But I think just volume is what matters at this point. You've got the same number of quad 1 wins in total, but Tennessee has 5 quad 1A wins compared to just 4 for Arizona. And you look, that quad 3 loss to Oregon State is, an outlier when you look at some of these teams. Most of them don't have a quad 3 loss. So that's just something else that kind of hurts Carolina a bit, or Arizona a bit as well. But again, they've got a road game at USC. Can't really afford to lose that. But if Tennessee slips up, loses to Kentucky at home, early exit from the SEC tournament, I think you could see Arizona climb back up there. I don't think the gap is so wide at this point that they can't do it. And then Carolina is really still in that mix as well, with a chance to win at Duke. They're 7-2 in true road games. That's something the committee usually looks at. Like I said, they're also undefeated since the reveal. Not a lot of those wins super impactful outside of winning at Virginia, and they lag behind a little bit with just 6 quad 1 wins, but they've got another 6 in quadrant 2. And so they've got a lot going for them as well. Again, I think what you see is just a volume argument in some ways of the SEC has provided Tennessee with more opportunities for quality wins, and they've taken advantage. The Pac-12 and the ACC are a little bit light on those, and that's not really Arizona and North Carolina's fault. But when you step back and look at it, I think you look at the top wins that Tennessee has, and they just are better in totality than the top wins that you see from Arizona and North Carolina.
Well, Kevin, I'll throw this to you and expand a little bit on Andy's point. So as we head into the conference tournament slate, it would seem that Tennessee has the biggest advantage because they're going to be potentially playing the best teams and have the most quad 1 opportunities in that SEC tournament. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'm not sure how much it will matter from a standpoint that they already are ahead of the game in that regard. But like they can just keep padding the resume and keep bolstering with wins in the SEC tournament, whereas certainly not Arizona, and I think you would also include North Carolina in that regard, where it's going to be hard to get those opportunities. And Tennessee could, if Tennessee wins the SEC tournament, they're going to add 2, maybe 3 good wins, whereas I think North Carolina or Arizona, maybe 1 or 2 at best, and there's not a lot of top tier wins to go get. Certainly not in the Pac-12, only really Duke in the ACC. So I think Tennessee certainly has the upper hand as of now, both just from what they've accomplished already and what they still have the opportunity to accomplish down the stretch.
Yeah, in full agreement there. Feels like Tennessee is definitively in the driver's seat for that final number 1 seed. Going to take a quick break on fielding the 68. Up next, going to talk some movement in the protected seeds about Iowa State and Baylor, how they're jumping, Marquette and Kansas falling, and also going to go over the 6 and 7 line, the 4 and 5 line, some shifting that's going on in those areas as well. Stick with us.
The best month of the year is here, which is why you need to know that we are now partnered with BetMGM. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers of the Field of 68 throughout the conference and NCAA tournament. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, you can use the bonus code FIELD150, and you'll get $150 in free bets on your first wager with BetMGM, regardless of whether or not that bet hits. Here's how you make it work. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using the bonus code FIELD150. Deposit at least $5 and place your first wager on any game, and you get $150 in free bets regardless of the outcome. Just make sure you use that bonus code FIELD150 when you sign up. And most importantly, we have some fun stuff coming up for the conference tournaments and for the NCAA tournament. Bet insurance tokens, college hoops odds boosts, and what I love the most, a nice little parlay boost, as well as a ridiculous array of prop bets for anything that you could possibly imagine betting on in March and in early April. BetMGM is the king of the prop bet. So go download the BetMGM app, use Field150 as the code, and sign up today. And while I've got you here, a quick request. The best way to support the Field of 68 content that you get here for absolutely free is to engage with it. Rate and review the podcast. Like and share YouTube videos. Tell your friends about us. It all helps in a world where the algorithm is king. And now, back to our show.
Welcome back into Fielding the 68, brought to you by Rhythm. Faxon Childress, Kevin Sweeney, and Andy Bottoms here, talking a lot of college basketball, a lot of bracketology, a lot of seed movement. And up next is the movement in the protected seeds from this past week. Iowa State and Baylor took a big jump while Marquette and Kansas took a big fall. We got a lot to cover in this segment. It's going to be jam-packed. Andy, I'll throw it to you first. Let's talk a little bit about Iowa State and Baylor and the weeks that they had to improve their seeding.
Yeah, it's interesting. This whole area is one of the tougher ones as I was going through and looking for the seed list today. These 4 teams are all really right next to each other on mine. So 2 of them are going to get the last 2 seeds. The other 2 are going to get the first couple 3 seeds. And you look at this week, You saw Iowa State beat BYU, be able to come back in a game that BYU was looking like they might be able to steal another one on the road, but Hilton Magic would not allow it. And so Iowa State beat them. Baylor beat Texas on Monday. And even Kansas had a pretty impressive, from a margin of victory standpoint, win over Kansas State. And then you saw Marquette lose to UConn with Kolek sidelined again. I think that's one of the big things that you have to figure out how the committee is going to handle that. They're certainly asking questions about what his availability is going to be for the tournament. Marquette, I'm sure, is being purposefully vague in some of those kinds of conversations. But, when you look at Iowa State and Baylor and really all these teams, there's just a lot of similarities in terms of whether that's quad 1 wins. They all have, 7, except Baylor has 8. Even quad 1A wins. 3 of them have 5 and Kansas has 6. And so you look at a bunch of those things and they're really closely bunched together. Resume metrics, the averages are, right around 7th for 3 of them. Marquette stands out a little bit higher in that regard. Quality metrics, they all average out in, between 10 and 16. So just a little bit hard to create separation here. I think as I look at this area, the couple things that stand out. One, Iowa State is 329th in non-conference strength of schedule. We've talked about that before. That's why they've been maybe a little bit slower to rise up the seed list, because you can look back historically and see teams get penalized a little bit for that. But it's also, at what point have they won enough games where maybe that doesn't matter as much as it did before? 2, you've got Kansas. They've only got 3 true road wins on the season, but they also have massive wins over Houston, UConn, Tennessee. They beat Baylor at home, Kentucky. So, beaten 3 of the 4 1 seeds. And that means obviously quite a bit as you look at it that way. So you've got injury things about how does the McCullough, the games McCullough missed impact Kansas? What's his outlook going forward? Kolek talked about the injury there. So these teams are, Baylor and Iowa State had the biggest wins or the best wins of those over the course of the week. But those 4 are really tightly bunched together.
Kevin, as we throw it to you, bunched together was used multiple times there by Andy. Is there any one of these 4 teams that you feel best about that could potentially pull away from the bunch down the stretch?
I think it's going to be hard to pull away for anyone. I think the team I would probably feel best about doing that is Kansas, because they already have such good wins, right? I think one of the main issues that Kansas could run into is the committee saying, oh, well, you're not playing great lately, haven't been great in Big 12 play, the road record, as alluded to. Well, Kansas gets the opportunity of all opportunities this weekend on the road at Houston. I mean, I think they win that game. They're certainly right back on the 2 line if they weren't there already. I mean, I don't think that they can jump up past Tennessee for a 1 seed, but they win at Houston and then they win the Big 12 tournament. Their resume is going to be incredibly strong at the top. And I do think the quantity of losses will keep them off the 1 line, but I think it's going to be hard for anyone else to have the volume that Kansas does. So I think for them, if they can finish strong, they have a great opportunity to solidify themselves as not just a 2 seed, but potentially a high 2 seed. But, just haven't necessarily looked the part here lately. And I think that's the concern, right? Where, Iowa State, yes, you can poke holes at the non-conference, whatever. They've been phenomenal, right? They've earned where they are on the seed list because of the way that they've played here down the stretch. So I think that's the number one thing I would just be watching is all right, can Kansas do enough to prove that this February swoon is the result, the byproduct of injuries and whatnot? And if they do, I think they're going to have a great chance to be a very high seed on Sunday.
Sweeny, we'll stay with you for this. Shifting gears to Mark Few and his bunch out in the state of Washington. Gonzaga's on the rise, man, up to the 6 or 7 line. Talk a little bit about this last week for them and really the last 2 weeks that have boosted their resume in great fashion down the stretch.
Yeah, I mean, they're waiting to play in the WCC tournament, have an opportunity to even further strengthen things with another win against St. Mary's potentially there in Vegas, which would be massive because the predictive metrics already love this group, right? I mean, you look at Gonzaga's KenPom, they're 15th in the land, and so I think just from a seeding standpoint, once you feel confident that they're in the field, they want to rise up pretty quickly because. Look, I mean, if I'm a 1 seed or I'm a 2 seed and I see Gonzaga's the 9 or the 10 in my bracket, I'm furious. I mean, this is one of the best teams in college basketball based on the numbers. And now that they have enough wins to show for it, right? At Kentucky, obviously, at St. Mary's, potentially a neutral St. Mary's, one at San Francisco, which does matter as well, right? Like now that the resume isn't so thin, I think they're going to rise really quickly. And so it wouldn't surprise me if they wind up a 6. I don't think they can quite get up to a protected seed. I think that would be a bit too far a climb, partially because I think the 4s are relatively strong at the moment. But I think the 6 or even the 5 might be the ceiling, and certainly that 6-7 range feels relatively solid for them, especially if they can win in Vegas here this weekend.
Andy, anything to add to that about Gonzaga?
No, I would echo a lot of what Sweeney had to say there. For me, I was hesitant to even put them in the field just because they didn't have the wins to back up the numbers that they were putting up on the predictive side of things. And so even though you could probably watch them and use the eye test and all that stuff, at some point you have to show that you can beat tournament teams. They've shown that they've beaten 2 on the road. So kind of bonus points or however you want to think of it for being able to win those games on the road, because we know that's important in the eyes of the committee. And so now you look up and they've got 6 wins in quads 1 and 2. The only quad 2 loss they have is by 1 point at Santa Clara. And so you can justify, and once you justify having them in, I think we've talked about this a number of times on the show, then you start looking at the metrics to figure out where you want to seed them, and they rise up the list pretty quickly at that point. So I think that was really the hesitation for me, and being able to get those couple big road wins gets over that hurdle, and then you're kind of rolling downhill at that point.
Well, with Gonzaga trending towards the 6th line, take a moment to talk about some of the other teams currently battling for positioning towards the 5 line, towards the 6th line. BYU and Clemson seemingly on the rise, while Dayton and Wisconsin on the decline. Andy, we'll come back to you to start things off. What do you think about those 4 teams and their outlook down the stretch of the season headed into conference tournament play?
Yeah, BYU, the big thing that has catapulted them, they're a little bit like what I was just talking about with Gonzaga. Their predictive metrics have been really strong all year long. The resume metrics have caught up a bit now, especially after winning at Kansas. So even though they're only 3-7 in true road games, having that one is a huge one. Their non-conference strength of schedule is not great either, but they did beat San Diego State in the non-conference. They beat NC State on a neutral floor. So you feel pretty good about them. And again, I think they've just been able to stack enough good wins to kind of justify where some of their metrics put them. And then Clemson, I think one of the challenges with them is some of the big wins they had feel like a long time ago in terms of winning at Alabama, the work they did in the non-conference, beating Boise and TCU. But that helps them in a situation where we talked about this with Carolina. There's not a ton of huge opportunities in the ACC. They picked off a big one of those by winning at North Carolina. So they have 2 great road wins with beating Alabama and North Carolina away from home. That really steadies them from a seeding standpoint, gives them a relatively high floor in that regard. They do have 2 quad 3 losses. The metrics are decent, though, and they did go out and schedule aggressively, have 9 wins away from home. So they just kind of look better and better. And some other teams as they've lost, they've just been steady and let other teams fall behind them. For Dayton, this one is a hard one to peg. I think has been a hard one for us to seed throughout the year, simply because they've hardly beaten any teams in the field. Now, the good news for them is St. John's has played their way into a number of people's fields, and so that gives them a neutral court win over a team in the field. But that's it. Their best 4 wins are St. John's and Cincinnati on neutral courts, at SMU and at Duquesne. And so even though they also don't have a loss outside of the top 2 quadrants, you're really relying a lot on the resume metrics at that point and even the predictives to a certain extent to tell you where to put Dayton, even though they've just haven't had that many opportunities against tournament teams, and certainly against teams that are locks for the tournament. And then Wisconsin, this one I know got a lot of comments when our combined bracket was tweeted out earlier in the week. The reality is their wins early in the season still count. So you can watch them now and say they're not playing very well, and even make the argument that the committee should go back to looking at the last 10 or 12 games and say that matters to them. But that's not what the committee has told us over the course of time. So they still have 5 quad 1A wins. They've got 12 wins in the top 2 quadrants and no losses outside of the top 2. The loss at Michigan certainly doesn't look good. They played a tough non-conference schedule. They beat Marquette, swept Michigan State, beat Virginia in the non-conference. So they've done a lot of good things, even though they haven't played well of late. So I think that's why they haven't just totally plummeted down the seed list like a lot of people would have expected. That being said, they were 16th at the reveal. They've 2-3 since then. Losing at Iowa, at IU, and then losing at home to Illinois. So it's reasonable to expect they've dipped a little bit from there. But you're also not going to see somebody who was a 4 seed at the reveal drop within just a couple weeks to an 8 seed or something like that. So I think it's pretty reasonable to have them in that 6 range to say, hey, you've been penalized a little bit because you've lost games since you were 16th overall, but they're just not going to drop as far as I think people might expect just based on recent play.
Yeah, some good stuff there, Andy, and some expansion on the Clemson points. Clemson 15-4 when Jack Clark plays, and their 4 losses have come by a combined 6 points. So 3 one-point losses and that double OT loss to Georgia Tech. Fair to say that they're a completely different team with Clark in the equation and have quietly crept up into top 20 adjusted offense on KenPom as well. So there's somebody I've got my eye on down the stretch. Kevin, as we throw things to you, any expansion on what Andy said about these 4 teams that are currently battling for positioning on the 5 and 6 line?
I thought Andy did a nice job with it. Just one thing I would add with Dayton, they haven't been perfect in league play by any means. I mean, they've avoided bad losses. All 4 losses are away from home. None of them outside of the top 2 quadrants. But this has not been a dominant showing. They are going to wind up finishing 3rd in the Atlantic 10, which is a 1-bid league other than Dayton. And as Andy said, a couple of those wins in the non-conference haven't necessarily aged as well as hoped. I mean, St. John's has their tournament team, but SMU on the road, great win by the numbers, but an SMU team that's not really close to the field. Cincinnati, not all that close to the field either. They're a good example of a team that they did their work. They've kept their resume clean. Their metrics are strong. There's not a lot of reasons to be skeptical of Dayton other than the lack of those wins against the field. But they just haven't necessarily looked the part of a high-level seed here lately. And so curious to see how the committee deals with them, and especially if they lose again in the Atlantic 10 tournament, which is quite possible given how that they played and now how balanced the Atlantic 10 is. I believe there's 8 or 9 teams that are in the top 100. So a lot of teams that can trip you up, but not a lot of teams that are at-large teams. Should be an interesting tournament.
Some good stuff there. Going to be revealing the last 4 in and the first 4 out on the other side on Fielding the 68. Stick with us, everybody.
There is nothing in sports better than the heart of the college basketball season, which is why I need to tell you guys about our partners over at Rhythm. If you're into sports betting, you need Rhythm, the place for data-backed props and picks. For those that are unfamiliar, Rhythm, spelled RITHMM, is the go-to mobile app for player props and game picks. Backed by AI predictive models, Rhythm helps you make smarter and faster betting decisions across all sports, but particularly college hoops, where there are as many as 150 games a day during conference play, many of which have softer lines at BetMGM than you'll find in the NFL or the NBA. With Rhythm, you get data-backed picks for every Division I game every day. Users get free picks daily with the ability to upgrade to unlimited access. And for those of you already using modeling, you can build custom sports betting models within the Rhythm app itself. I am a Rhythm user, and I found that I've been a better when I focus on lines where my gut and Rhythm's modeling are aligned. When I think UConn can cover on the road against Butler and Rhythm backs that up, we fire. But Rhythm also helps lead you to plays that you didn't know you needed to make. Like, for example, when the data says bet the over in UMass Lowell versus New Hampshire because you have a 61% edge on that line, you bet the over and you bink. So if you want to increase your edge and win more bets, go to the link in the description below and download Rhythm today. That's RITHMM, the place for data-backed props and picks.
Welcome back into Fielding the 68, brought to you by Rhythm. Faxon Childress, Kevin Sweeney, and Andy Bottoms join you. Going to be revealing our bubble. Andy, we're going to come to you first on the last 4 in. Let's see who you've got on the bubble just sneaking into the tournament this week as of right now on Friday, March 8th.
Yeah, so my last 4 in, I've got St. John's, Villanova, Virginia, and New Mexico. I think a lot of similar names as everybody's been batting around on here over the last couple of weeks. Seton or St. John's, didn't have a game that would help them all that much, except with the metrics by winning at DePaul. this week. But right now, you look at them, the quality metrics are really solid. They're just 4-9 against Q1, but they do have, the sweep of Villanova continues to look good. They beat Creighton and have been playing better of late. So they're, right there in that mix. Villanova, they dipped back a little bit by losing that game to Seton Hall earlier in the week. Their resume metrics are a little in the same neighborhood of St. John's. Quality metrics are slightly better, but the St. John's sweep of them is kind of what, when they're next to them on the C list for me, that dropped them back a little bit further. But you still have their neutral court wins over Carolina and Texas Tech have held up well, even Memphis to a certain extent. They won at Creighton, so that shows good ability to win on the road. But they've got Creighton again at home over the weekend, so if they can win that game, they can breathe a little bit easier. Losing would put them in some jeopardy there. Virginia, you look, the resume metrics are good enough that feels like they're not going to get left out. The win at Clemson is a solid one. They've been blown out. I think all of their losses by double digits. We've seen them look really bad at times. When they lose, they do it in spectacular fashion, I guess you could say. And they really only have 2 wins against the field if you look at it. They won at Clemson. They beat Florida on a neutral court. They do have wins over Wake and Texas A&M, which help for bubble purposes, I suppose. So for now, it's take care of business at Georgia Tech against Georgia Tech over the weekend and see where things go from there. And then New Mexico, just kind of hanging around here on the bubble. Big game for them at Utah State. They're 25th in the net, top 50, or it averages less than 50 in both the resume and the quality metrics. They've done all their damage in the league. All their best wins have come in league play. Only one of those on the road, where they won at Nevada as they swept the Wolfpack. And so you look at that quad 4 loss to Air Force is a killer. UNLV playing better has actually taken one of their losses to the Rebels and made it Q2. So that helps a little bit. But there it's just they've done so much, didn't really do a lot in the non-conference because the non-conference strength of schedule wasn't very good. And like I said, all their wins against the field came in league play. So they're really need that win at Utah State coming up this weekend.
Yeah, and Virginia, for me, continues to be the most polarizing case study. Almost outside the top 200 in adjusted offense, yet top 10 in adjusted defense. All the losses by double digits. Sweeny, throwing things to you for your last 4 in. Who's just sneaking into the tournament as of this week?
Yeah, so I have a relatively similar group as Andy. I have St. John's, Virginia, New Mexico, and James Madison is the one surprise. So a few notes there. You mentioned, St. John's. The only thing I'd add with that, Andy, is that it feels like they've been helped by other teams struggling, and they've been able to kind of slide under the radar, win the games they're supposed to win here in the last week or so, and seen their resume improve as well with Villanova getting into the field. They're in my final 4 buys as of now. Villanova is them dropping out what hurt St. John's. Virginia can't lose game against Georgia Tech this weekend. Have to find a way to win it. They win it, I think they will be in regardless. Maybe get sent to Dayton though, partially because of those quality metrics. New Mexico, notably that those UNLV sweep no longer in the bad loss territory. We'll see if that holds. UNLV is playing great basketball though. I do think that the committee should probably acknowledge that with New Mexico. But they are, as bubbly as can be. We'll see how strong, numbers like that net can prop them up if they can't beat a team like Utah State. I think they need that win, or they need a game in the Mountain West tournament against one of the top 6 or 7 in the league to really establish themselves as a tournament team. And then my last team is James Madison. I mentioned that, I think that some of the other teams around the bubble haven't helped themselves, right? I don't feel strongly about anyone else being in the field. And I look at James Madison at 27-3 in Division I competition with a road win at Michigan State. And I think that the committee should reward a team like this, right? I'm not sure that they will. Again, they would take another loss by being in this at-large pool. Right now they're the 2 seed in the Sun Belt tournament, so they have to be in our at-large pool, Appalachian State. That automatic qualifier at the moment. If JMU wins the conference tournament, obviously they're in. If they're not, that means they have 4 losses now. Is that enough to knock them out? We'll see. I think it depends who they lose to. I think if they lose to Appalachian State, they have a pretty potent argument of having lost to only 2 teams all season. And I do think big picture that, or at least I'm hopeful that the committee will acknowledge how challenging it is for teams like James Madison to schedule tough. Yes, James Madison is a brutal strength of schedule. No one can deny that. But John Fanta from Fox, and obviously a friend of Feeling the 68 as well. Fanta wrote a story this week about how James Madison only got that Michigan State game because one of their assistants is a relative of Tom Izzo's, and literally had to call in a favor to convince them to play. Otherwise, no one in their region was willing to play them in a bye game. So I just think it's really, really important to note that look, it's not James Madison's fault necessarily that they scheduled poorly. They do what they can. They have to fill out their schedule. And some of the teams that they did schedule didn't turn out as good as they have been. I mean, I think Buffalo had 9 straight winning seasons when JMU scheduled home and home with them. Then Buffalo this year goes 4-26, right? Some of those things are out of their control. And I hope that a team that wins 30 games in the regular season is rewarded with a tournament bid, regardless of what happens in the Sun Belt tournament. But obviously, it will be a nail biter for them if they don't find a way to get that automatic qualifier.
Sweeney pushing that 2-bid Sun Belt movement. I agree with you. I like that. I like the JMU love. Kevin, we'll stick with you for your first 4 out. Who is just on the other side of the chopping block this week for you?
Yeah, so I have Providence, Colorado, Texas A&M, and Iowa as the 4 teams. Providence starting there. I think a phenomenal opportunity coming up this weekend against UConn. Win that game. I think they're in the tournament regardless. I guess they probably couldn't lose to DePaul or Georgetown and at least not make it interesting. But that would be a monster win for them. The resume topper. They already have a home win against Wisconsin, a home win against Marquette, a home win against Creighton. Those are 3 very nice wins. But to have a win over a 1 seed, I think would make it hard to leave them out. I know it's been talked about a lot with them. Their middling record and quote unquote relevant games, or I forget the term that Rocco uses all the time. Meaningful games, that's the one. Quad 1 through 3. But I do think that the wins that they have warrant them strong consideration. Colorado, lack of top end wins, a big concern for them. But road win at Oregon was big, and we'll see if they can get one more big one in the Pac-12 tournament. I think they're in solid shape right now, but need to finish strong. Remember, our bubble is relatively tight here because we have those 2 automatic qualifiers in the American and the A10 that could wind up being 1-bid leagues. Right now, they're 2 in our projections. The other 2 teams that I mentioned, I know Iowa is a big one, surging into consideration. Could make things really interesting if they can beat, if they can beat Illinois this weekend. Very tricky game, obviously. Very good Illinois team, but that would be the type of win that would get them back in the conversation. And then Texas A&M, just hard for me to get over the 4 quad 3 losses. Doesn't mean that they won't be in. They have some time to figure things out. But I'm not confident with A&M, and they have another essentially must-win game over the weekend against Ole Miss. Have to find a way to win it if they want to be a tournament team.
Yeah, A&M is going to be interesting down the stretch. We'll see if Buzz can get it turned around in College Station. Andy, let's take a look at your first 4 out for this week.
Yeah, a lot of common ground here. Colorado, Providence, Iowa, and I had Drake as the last team, although I did look at Texas A&M as well. They were pretty close with Drake for me. Colorado, as Sweeney talked about, the knock on them is wins against the field or overall quality wins. They do have 2 quad 1 wins at Washington, at Oregon. Their only win against the team that we'd have in the field as an at-large is Washington State. They did beat Richmond on neutral court, so that helps a little bit as you think about the Spiders being at least in our bracket at this point. That win on the road got them to 3-7 in true road games. To me, the metrics look really good. They're average out to 39th in resume metrics, 39.5 in quality metrics. But my hang up is just the lack of wins over clear at-large teams. Providence, Sweeney said it well. I don't know there's too much to say. I think the UConn, calling a win over UConn a must is probably putting it a little bit too far. But I think they need multiple wins in the Big East tournament to really overcome losing that game. As he said, they're 9-11 in meaningful games. That becomes a little bit difficult. They've got 10 wins in quad 4 right now. As you look at them and the Hopkins injury we've talked about multiple times on here. Iowa, what you like about them, quad 1 road wins at Michigan State and at Northwestern. Winning at 2 of the better teams in the Big Ten goes a long way. win over Seton Hall helps a little bit as they've played their way further into the field. And otherwise, the other good wins they have are Nebraska and Wisconsin at home. That Illinois game is a huge one for them over the weekend. I think if they win that, have a fairly compelling argument to at least get to Dayton. And then Drake, you kind of lump them in with them and James Madison. I think the committee in a couple of the recent seasons has given a nod to some of the other conferences. So I threw Drake in the mix here. They're 3-1 in quad one, and 5-4 overall in the top two quadrants, which is relatively solid. Similarly, non-con strength of schedule to what he talked about with James Madison is not very good, but you can imagine pretty tough to get people to play Drake since they've been good for a while. But did beat Nevada in the non-conference on a neutral court. That one has aged incredibly well. Sweat Bradley. Really need Bradley to win again in their quarterfinal matchup so that they can play them again, because that's another chance to get a solid win there. And so we'll see what happens. I think they need to make the final of the Missouri Valley to make this a legitimate case, but I think they've done a lot of good work, and again, wouldn't mind seeing the committee reward them. And like I said, Texas A&M was the other team that I had in there. They've got 6 quad 1 wins and 4 quad 3 losses. So trying to reconcile and balance those things out is a little bit tricky at this point with the Aggies. So we'll see if they can win at Ole Miss, and then I think their case becomes a bit more compelling as they get further above 500. And they are a team that went out and scheduled non-conference strength schedule at 21st. So in contrast to some other teams that are right around that spot, that's something that they can really harken back to. I know that was a knock on them in years past. So they've definitely rectified that, and that gives them something else to plug their case with.
Yeah, going to take a quick look now at our consensus last 4 in and first 4 out. I think we're going to see a lot of common ground here. Virginia, Villanova, St. John's, and New Mexico as fielding the 68's last 4 in. So once again, some common ground. The Who's are the most intriguing team to me just because of the whole 3 bid versus 4 bid, potentially 5 with Wake Forest if something strange happens at this point, ACC. But any thoughts on the consensus last 4 in from either of you? I think we're pretty much all on the same page.
Yeah, I think more work to be done this weekend. Things will change, but I think for now I feel good about where we are.
As we take a look now at our consensus first 4 out, Colorado, Iowa, Providence, and Drake. So once again, more common ground with what Kevin Sweeney and Andy Bottoms had in their respective first 4 out and last 4 in. Going to take a quick break on Fielding the 68. Going to take some questions from the chat and more up next. Stick with us.
By now, you guys have surely heard about Autograph, an app founded by Tom Brady with the intention of disrupting the way that fans consume content covering their favorite teams. This is how the app works. All of the podcasters, bloggers, and digital creators covering a team have their content sent to that team's page in the Autograph app. Instead of having to bounce from site to site or trying to navigate the safer workspaces on Twitter, you can just scroll through Autograph. This isn't a hard sell. This is the truth. I am a UConn fan, and I use the Autograph app to keep up with the writers I read and the pods that I listen to about UConn basketball. The best part is that every piece of content that you consume gives you reward points. The more you get, the more chances you have at things like discounted tickets to games and the grand prize, a trip to the LA Regional and a spot in a suite for the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 games. Here's the best part. We've partnered with Autograph to donate $1 to the V Foundation every time someone downloads the app using the code F68, with a minimum of $2,500 getting donated. The app is free. So download, use the code F68, help us raise a little bit of money for cancer research, and give Autograph a try. I promise you it will be worth it. And while we're here, a quick reminder, make sure that you subscribe to the Daily. We have new landing pages with deep dives into each coaching change, as well as a tracker that provides scouting reports on the transfers that have entered the portal that you are going to want to know about. Hit the link below to subscribe.
Welcome back into Fielding the 68, brought to you by Rhythm. Faxon Childress, Kevin Sweeney, and Andy Bottoms here. Final segment of the program on a Friday afternoon. Going to take some questions from the chat. We'll start with Andy. How far out of the picture is Memphis? Asked John M., and then we'll go to you, Kevin, as well.
They're probably in maybe next 4 out territory. I think they have righted the ship a little bit, enough to be back in the mix. So obviously the game at FAU over the weekend becomes really huge for them. I think that would further catapult them back into the discussion as you look at it that way. So they're, right there. They got 7 wins in true road games. That's helpful. 9 road neutral wins overall. So I think that's good. The resume metrics, as you might suspect, which is kind of what was the case earlier in the year, they've dropped off a bit, but they're at least within a range that would be acceptable or not unprecedented, I guess you'd say, as you get through there. The quality metrics not as good as you look at it that way, but I think they are in the mix. 6-6 in the top 2 quadrants. Winning at FAU would be huge for them. So they're not dead by any stretch of the imagination, but probably need to win that game and then have a relatively deep run in the AAC tournament where you've got a lot of maybe good but not great wins to pick up. But just to be able to bolster their win total would be key there. And I think for them, when you look at the quality metrics, style points matter maybe a little bit more than it does for other people. To be able to come out and dominate would be a big thing for them.
Kevin, anything to add on Penny Hardaway's group in the state of Tennessee?
Yeah, I agree. Generally, I would say I think one team that's kind of an interesting comparison with Memphis. I have Memphis as I think my 8th team out of the field. An interesting comparison to me is New Mexico. They both have a ghastly quad 4 home loss. They both have have a similar record in quad 1 and quad 2 games. I think Memphis is 6-6. I think New Mexico is either 6 or 5-7. The big difference for New Mexico is that they have the really strong quality performance metrics. I mean, they've looked the part much more than Memphis has, and that right now is a big reason for the difference between them being right around our cut line and Memphis having work to do. So, a road win against FAU would be huge. I think without it, it's probably auto bid or bust. If they can win that road game, maybe they can get to the AAC championship game and play their way into the field without winning the conference tournament. Also, one thing I'd note with Memphis is that conference championship game is going to end about an hour before the selection show. I mean, it is tight, and so how the committee deals with the uncertainty if Memphis is right around that cut line playing in the conference championship will be very interesting to monitor.
Andy, throwing things back to you. Actually have a question from our producer, Dagan, who says, how safe is Seton Hall after their win over Villanova?
Yeah, I mean, they just absolutely had to. I have them as the first team clear of Dayton at this point. So they would be on my seed list. They'd be 40th. So, and I think there's a little gap between the teams in front of them. A lot of cases of teams in front of them are teams like FAU, Nebraska, Mississippi State, Michigan State, kind of in that general vicinity. Probably another team I'm forgetting there. So, obviously they can't lose to DePaul at home over the weekend. That would be disastrous. But I do think otherwise the net isn't particularly great. The quality metrics aren't great, but I have a hard time thinking that a team that beat UConn and Marquette and then even had some solid road wins would be left out. That sweep of St. John's, like I said, looks better and better for them. They swept Butler by winning on the road there. They won at Providence, which is another bubble team. And so I think when you look, it seems hard to fathom being left out in my view, but I don't think they're so safe that you get a few bid thieves in there. They lose their first game of the Big East tournament, that things couldn't go awry. But I think they're certainly safer than other teams there just based on the combination of things they've done. They could really impact their quality metrics by really blowing out DePaul. Take a page out of the St. John's book and run it up on them to help the thing that maybe is one of their biggest blemishes at this point.
Kevin, anything to add about Dagan's Seton Hall Pirates?
Yeah, don't lose to DePaul. It's really all I've got to say. Win that game. I think Seton Hall should dance and be relatively comfortable doing so. Is there a chance they could get sent to Dayton? Yeah, but even if not, regardless, I think they'd be in the field without any question should they beat DePaul.
2 more questions remaining. Sweeney, we'll start with you here. How far can Kentucky potentially rise, asks Jacob P.
I think maybe that back end of the 3 line is possible. I don't know how likely it is. I think it would take a win over Tennessee this weekend to do it. But, I mean, that would be a monster win on the road against the 1 seed. They already have the road win against Auburn. I mean, you you would add Kentucky to the conversation of teams that have the best, road resumes. And then obviously the neutral court win over North Carolina is huge. So I think certainly that would vault them into the 3 mix. I think it'd be hard to get to the 2 line. I don't know if Andy agrees with me on that front, but maybe not impossible with a SEC tournament run. One thing, again, with the SEC tournament is, it goes till Sunday, and we've seen in the past that maybe, some of those back end of the week games don't have as much of an impact. So even if Kentucky is, beating an Alabama or an Auburn or, someone like that in the SEC tournament, maybe it doesn't move the needle as much as it should because of, just the committee working through other stuff. That being said, we'll see. I think the ceiling is definitely high given the opportunities they still have left on the board.
Yeah, I was going to say we've seen the highs and lows in dramatic fashion for Kentucky over the course of the year. Andy, anything to add to that about the Wildcats?
Yeah, I don't know that they could get to the 2 line based on how many teams they'd have to pass at this point. I do think a 3 is definitely feasible if you look where they are. They're kind of, I think I had them as my 14th or 15th team overall, so they're kind of in the middle of that 4 line today. But I mean, if you look at the road wins, again, we talk about this a lot. The committee has often propped teams up that won tough games on the road. So they've already won at Alabama in convincing fashion, won at Mississippi State, won at Florida. And oddly enough for them, they've lost to some of the better teams they've played at home, which is a little bit weird. Losing to Florida, Tennessee, Gonzaga at home is kind of an odd juxtaposition with the way that they've played on the road. And so, winning at Tennessee would be certainly a huge win, a really another quad 1 road win against the team in the field and in the field safely. So I think that alone could propel them probably to the top 4 seed, maybe to one of the last 3 seeds. It's just a matter of how many teams can you pass. You need a lot of things to go well. And as much as we all get caught up in conference tournaments, and I do this as well, even doing bracketology stuff, like you got to try to remember that it's only 1 game. And the committee has shown us in multiple cases where we could point to like, well, did that tournament even matter? Type of thing. So it's easy to get caught up in that. And if they make a run and score 95 points a game as they're going through it, it'll be hard not to get caught up in some of that. But I think it's important to remember that they can probably only move so much at this point based on where they are.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the committee chooses to evaluate Kentucky down the stretch. Final question here on Fielding the 68. Andy, we'll start with you. Tony S. asks, when do you guys cut down the bubble, and how many teams do you typically cut it to?
I don't know. I think this is probably a case where everybody does it differently. For me, I start the season with the spreadsheet that doesn't have every team in it by any stretch, but just kind of go through and the teams that at least at the beginning of the season you think could have a reasonable chance, and teams come onto and off of that through the process. I trimmed a bunch of them out of, I don't know, a week or so ago, but now you've kind of got, I've tracked them for this long. What's the point of getting rid of it at this stage? You might as well just leave them on type territory. But I do think you've probably got at this point maybe 10 teams, maybe 12 teams outside of the field that you're really still tracking that have a legitimate chance. I mean, again, if you kind of go back to what I said about Kentucky, it becomes difficult to really move too much. If you're 12 teams outside the field, what in the world are you going to do over the next couple, the next week or so that really can erase that? So every year's a little bit different, but I'd say right now you've probably got your first 4 out, your next 4 out, and then maybe 4 to 6 other teams that are still there. Especially with the major conferences, you see what transpires over the weekend in the last regular season game. And then with some of them, you kind of got to look and say, who can they actually beat in the conference tournament based on what the conference tournament bracket looks like. So that's kind of where I'm at, but I think it's probably one of those you could ask a whole bunch of people who do bracketology, and they probably will all give you a slightly different answer.
Yeah, I was going to say, Sweeney, you got any different method to the madness when trying to evaluate these bubble teams?
I wish I did. I just have a very disorganized spreadsheet. It's kind of a beast to manage. I will say this. I think you do get to a point, and I think we're already pretty close to this, where even some of the teams in your next 4 out, you start to really question how they could jump all of these teams without winning their conference tournament, right? Like, we just mentioned Memphis, right? Like I have them, if I have them 8th, back, right? How are they jumping over 7 teams, in the next week and a half with 4 games? It feels unlikely without, a real perfect storm happening. Now, I do think this year is a bit unique because we do have as I mentioned before, kind of the bubble feeling a little bit There might be more optimism for bubble teams than usual because we're projecting a tighter cut line than I think is necessarily what will happen. But yeah, I do think you get to a point, especially towards the back half of that next 4 out, where it feels relatively bleak, but you still want to keep them on the radar in case things change. Again, especially with some of the metrics, the way they move, a big blowout win could swing you substantially up the metrics, and maybe all of a sudden you jump a couple teams you wouldn't have thought they would have jumped.
Final segment now on fielding the 68. Andy, we'll go to you first. Give us a couple games to watch this weekend that you've got your eye on.
Yeah, I'll go with a couple from the Mountain West on, I guess, somewhat starting tonight with Boise at San Diego State, although I think both those are pretty safe. But you look from a bubble perspective, New Mexico at Utah State, we alluded to that earlier. And then you've got UNLV at Nevada. UNLV is kind of hanging around, then get a road win at Nevada. That makes things pretty interesting for them going into the Mountain West tournament. So I think those are at least a couple on Saturday. I won't steal too many from Sweeny. One kind of off the radar one probably on Sunday, Nebraska at Michigan. The big knock on Nebraska at this point is they haven't won many games away from home. If they slip up here, it doesn't put them out by any stretch, but it's one that this is a chance to get as easy a road win as you can get in the Big Ten at this point. So if they're able to do that, I think they pretty much move to lock status for me as you look at them. But Sunday is pretty much all Big Ten games, and then a couple conference tournament championships, including the Missouri Valley, which, depending upon who's in it, based on some of the conversations we had earlier about Drake, could be certainly one that a lot of bubble teams are going to want to watch.
Kevin, any games to watch that you would like to add to that?
Yeah, Drake and Indiana State in the Valley tournament. Certainly, if you're a bubble team, you're hoping Indiana State wins that conference tournament. You'd probably rather deal with them than Drake from a bubble standpoint. The JMU situation worth watching. Some bubble teams that can't lose, right? St. John's can't lose to Georgetown, so Seton Hall can't lose to DePaul. Virginia can't lose to Georgia Tech. And then since the New Mexico coaching staff has been texting me the entire podcast, I will shout out that their game against Utah State is very important, and that they could really use a win to lock up their spot in the NCAA tournament. That'd be a big one.
Yeah, that'll be awesome to watch. And the Mountain West continues to be the most intriguing conference in all the land this year in college basketball. About to wrap things up here on the Field of 68 Media Network. So for my producer, Dagan Hughes, for Kevin Sweeney, for Andy Bottoms, I'm Faxon Childress saying so long on Fielding the 68. Thank you for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you next time.